I'm not messing around today. This isn't Petrillo Jenkins play nice treatment. This is your boy Wheeler. He's going to keep you on track. I think I'm already off the rails, but ignore all that.
We're calling it the Summit. I want to see that in whenever it's posted on social media. Summit. That's what we're doing.
OneSoccer Today Summit. I love it. It always sounds more official, like we're dealing with significant business. And I feel like we are today because emotions clearly running high on all sides of the equation stemming from that 2-0 loss. To put a bow on what we saw last night, the Richards and Balogun goals were good enough for the United States to down Canada in this Concacaf final. Let's go back to Las Vegas and hear some post-match thoughts from the Andy Petrillo alongside Christian Jack.
Playing in a final for the first time in 23 years, but they don't get the fairy tale ending they want. 2-0 is the result in favor of the Americans. They are the two-time and defending champions of Concacaf Nations League. Andy Petrillo and Christian Jack with you. What did you make of Canada's performance?
I thought they were really disappointing. I think they'll be really disappointed in the manner in which they conceded the goals. It has to be said, it's potentially savable, that goal. Obviously, from a set piece, you never want to give away set piece goals, and particularly in finals. But how did the set piece come? Through dominance and the flanks down the right-hand side, where the United States, I thought, started the game a lot better. And then you're starting a mountain that's very difficult to climb. But potentially, you could have got back into the game and then obviously conceding the second one. I thought it was really, really comfortable. The United States, I think they could have won by more. They had a goal cleared off the line, potential goal cleared off the line, lots of chances. By far and away a comprehensive victory for them, and for the Canadians a very, very disappointing game with a lot of questions on why some of their players weren't able to show up and perform.
A lot of expectations, of course, when it comes to that forward line. This is a team, when you talk about their identity, they have the offensive strength. Jonathan David, Kyle Larin, Alphonso Davies, we'll get to him just individually in a moment because I know John Herdman was trying to find that right spot for him on the pitch. But why do you think the Canadians couldn't find the back of the net given the strength that they have?
Because they haven't been able to show it a lot in any of the games. You know, they're a team of moments. They're not a team of, in terms of keeping the possession, they're a transitional team. And for them to develop the next step going forward, they need to be able to control games. And they weren't able to do that again. Okay, they had a lot of possession in the second half. They created the chances. It's easy to say if we took those chances, we would have got back in the game. But you're playing an opponent who's getting deeper and deeper, who's already up by 2 goals, very similar to the Morocco game. You're already, giving them a massive, massive advantage. So that's, for me, is a big problem. They've got to find a way of inserting more dominance and having that ability to keep the ball. And right now, for whatever reason, personnel, coaching, whatever it is, they've got to figure out how to improve in that area.
Are you concerned that it doesn't seem like they know where to play Alphonso Davies?
It's a major concern. It should be a major concern for all of Canada, because ultimately this is a young star, and we've seen him play at the very highest level in the UEFA Champions League, the elite competition in the world, and perform at a very high level, full of confidence and swagger. And he doesn't look like a player who's confident and's got swagger for Canada. He looks a young man who's very confused, that doesn't have an identity, doesn't really feel like he has a purpose, that is trying too much and is being moved around a lot, and that's confusing. So I think both he and the coaching staff need to figure this out pretty quickly to find his identity, so he can start getting to be performing at a higher level for Canada that can then help other players.
Tournament-wise, we know what's next is the Gold Cup, but maybe in the bigger philosophical question where they're watching their arch rivals lift a trophy, what's next for Canada?
Well, I think they've got to continue to try and develop players that they can rely on. I think it's clear that the United States tonight are a better team. We already knew that coming in. But this, as I said earlier, this is not a night for them to say that they lost because the team was better. This is not a night for them to talk about excuses because of preparation or budgets. I don't want to hear that. I think the next thing for them is to produce a bit more depth and then figure out how they can get better in terms of owning that possession and controlling football games. As I said, United States deserved it, but the magnitude and the way that they won was far too one-sided.
Up and down week of emotions for the Canadians, defeating Panama to get in their first final in 23 years. The announcement of Atiba Hutchinson's retirement from the pro and the national team. And then, of course, the disappointment in this one as it ends 2-0 for the Americans.
Good stuff all week long from Andy Petrillo and Christian Jack on ground level from Las Vegas. So KJ specifically had his say post-match. It's garnered a ton of reaction. It was emotional. It was raw immediately following the post-match whistle. Let's start with you, Oliver Platt. What did you make of what was said post-game? And more importantly, what actually did go wrong with the Canadian team in this game?
Yeah, so I think I agree wholeheartedly with something KJ said post-game, which was that particularly after that World Cup cycle where we've had that high of qualifying, we need to start having, real honest conversations about this team. We need to not be afraid to criticize people when it's warranted. I think Canadian soccer can be a very small world at times where everyone knows everyone. And so sometimes it gets softened a little bit or couched, and we've got to stop that and really start to address where this program is going, where we want it to go, and how we get there. I'm totally on board with what he says there, and I agree with some of the analysis that he gave last night as well. Some specific criticisms of the team I think are absolutely valid. I have to say though that having watched the game last night and then watched it back again this morning, I don't actually think Canada were as bad as being made out. In terms of the reaction, a lot of the reaction that we've seen, both from on our channel, from other media, from fans online, who I think, the majority of whom are pretty angry and disappointed about that performance. I don't know. I think when you watch it back, the way in which goals are scored, the timing of goals, I think can influence sometimes what you take away from the game. I didn't think for that 35 minutes up until the second goal, when it was 0-0 or 1-0 with the first goal coming off a corner, I didn't think Canada were playing that badly, to be honest with you. And I know a lot of people will disagree with that or not want to hear that right now. But these games are really difficult. And that's one thing I think we do have to get our head around as well in competing in this region going forwards in the coming years. This United States team is a very good team, like really, really good. And they're still a very good team with all the absences they had last night. Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, Serginho Dest, and so on. That side is just littered with talent. And I thought for the most part in that first half, Canada were competing. Now, there are a couple of big flaws. Set pieces were a huge problem all night long. Obviously, that cost them on the first goal. Second balls, I think there were big issues there, and we can get into that and some of the reasons for that. And that's where your 2 goals come from. But honestly, I again, particularly having watched it back a second time, I find it hard to go in 2-footed on the team today with really tough criticism and to slate them for that performance, because I don't think it was necessarily the disaster that maybe a 2-0 loss in the final kind of feels like in the emotion of it post-match.
Jordan, what do you make of that take?
Interesting. I didn't think Ollie was going to go that direction, but he also watched it back. Seeing a game twice, you'd always get a different perspective. I have not watched it back, but I have lived through the moments from yesterday and replayed them in my mind all the way up until 3 a.m. I will say, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is a Canadian side that everyone should still get behind, should still believe in. The program, I think John Herdman, still someone, even though yesterday I think tactically there are things you always want to change as a manager when you don't win, right? It's the toughest position, because if you win and your team does well, you got it all right, you're the hero. If you lose or your team doesn't come out with all cylinders firing, you're the guy that gets looked at and, hey, you could have done that, and you're expected. So it's a tough job to have. When I'm looking at the team, I think there were these little moments where we saw Canada not at their best, which is second balls, which was how they were pressing on the pitch, which was all these, I think, ball possession as well, even though their possession was high overall in the game. But I think in the moments, especially the first half, when they need to take care of the ball, gave it away too cheaply. So they never really got into a rhythm. I think that part is still true. Maybe it's not as bad as people are making it out to be, but I think in terms of the things that Canada usually does well, they didn't do well yesterday. And it shot them in the foot and ended up being such a uphill battle. They try to get it going. They try to get the game under them, but they couldn't, because they're always chasing it. They're always playing catch up.
When you look at it on the balance, I think that some of that frustration, and that was the word that I would probably use to describe the night more so than anything else. It was frustrating. It was frustrating to watch, because I think that Canadian soccer fans and this team understand what they're capable of doing and how they played in the past, and how that wasn't necessarily applicable for the full 90 minutes in that game. I think you're right, Jordan. They never found their rhythm. They never found their stride. It was second best to 50-50 balls. The first touches and the decision-making as they approach the attacking third, nowhere near good enough. And that's not what you expect from some of these players. It just didn't seem like that connection that they've had in the past was prevalent over the course of that game. Does it mean that the game was a complete abomination? Absolutely not. Does it make last night exceptionally disappointing considering the stakes, the opponent, what was on the line? Absolutely. They had every motivational element there dangling right in front of them, Ollie. They're playing the United States. They're playing for a trophy, for a first time to win in 23 years. Their captain, Atiba Hutchinson's leaving. This is a group who's been together really over the course of this run. Like, there weren't new players coming into the team. So with all those things considered, I think that that's why that little bit of a thud has echoed a little bit more loudly and reverberated even more over the course of the post-game discussion.
Absolutely. And I think that's a bit of a reality check, right? Like, I think it's not enough at the highest levels. And I do put the US increasingly edging into that category of being a top national team. We saw it at the World Cup as well, certainly in that group. It's not enough just to want it. Like, you have to be tactically excellent. You have to be technically excellent. You have to execute on the day. And we saw that, like, I'm not trying to absolve Canada of criticism here. There were certainly aspects of their performance which on the night weren't good enough. But I think you also have to look at the opponent here and say, in qualifying, we saw an American team that was very clearly trying to build an identity. They want to play a certain way. They want to play in the image of what they think that top World Cup teams look like. You know, be good on the ball, be good in their structure off the ball, try and build from the back. And I think that was a process they were going through, and there were bumps in the road along that process. It's never going to be perfect. You're never going to be able to play that way overnight. It takes time to build. And I think Canada did a great job in qualifying to take 4 points by exploiting some of those vulnerabilities at the time. Last night, we saw a US team that wasn't playing to an identity. They were playing to win that final. And when the team with more talent plays with that kind of humility, says, we're going to expose your weaknesses, defend against your strengths, even if it means playing a little bit differently to the way we might ideally like to play, then it's a really difficult game. And Canada came up against that and I think struggled with that.
But I kind of feel like the talent side of things, like Balogun is a phenomenal player. You can just see, like, he oozes quality and attack. But Pulisic, it wasn't a game where he pulled the strings. Gio Reyna was great in the first half. I just felt like in the game and over the balance of it, you know, their players were doing the little things right. They were a little bit more sharp, a little bit more focused, a little bit more on the same page. Like Joe Scally comes in, plays a wonderful game. Musa was a beast in midfield. The two center backs, Richards and Zimmerman. Zimmerman's an MLS player. You know, he was just simply massive over the course of the game. And I look at the talent in that Canadian team. It's like, I think they can give them a go based on who is on the field. But it's just how it was applied over the course of the game that I think that let them down, Jordan.
And quickly, we talked about rhythm, but there's also momentum as well. And I think that played a huge part in yesterday. I've played in games where you have this set out, hey, we're going to be on the front foot. And then when you come late into the first few challenges, 5 minutes goes by, 10 minutes goes by. If I'm playing center mid or I'm playing center back, whatever it is, it's like, hey, we're going to put pressure. And as soon as the player you're playing against gets a touch and he turns you, and he beat you once, or you get late, then that starts the momentum builds. He already beat you the first battle. It felt like yesterday Canada couldn't get their hands on. I don't think they're absolutely abysmal on the day. I just felt like their momentum, they couldn't catch it. The game was moving. And then when you're playing a team that is talented, if you don't match them with the desire or the work rate or match that momentum and you're tentative, then you get picked apart. And I think that's what happened last night.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement that the better team won, but let's discuss how we got there. And now all of a sudden, John Herdman's become a little bit of a divisive figure. As crazy as that sounds, like, I think that some people were genuinely divided about Canada's performance and Herdman's role at the World Cup. I kind of understood. I was very pro Herdman in that category. Coming out of the game last night, he did say this quote, turning things to the operational side of Canada soccer rather than what was actually applied on the field on Sunday, saying we've got to figure this out financially. We've got to get serious about winning a World Cup. When you play at home, you've got a chance to win it. You've got a chance to get to a semifinal, the quarterfinal, semifinal, and get on a roll to win it. And we're not serious. We brought a World Cup to our country, and we're not serious about winning it, end quote. There's certainly some truth in what Herdman has to say. Was this the time or place to continue down this road, down this path? We understand the change that the CSA has undergone. Is that the reason why Canada didn't perform against the United States, Ollie?
I don't think it's what people want to hear after the game. I think probably at times when you lose a final to a rival, your performance in certain areas isn't where you'd like it to be. You need to take your medicine a little bit. At the same time, I understand why John Herdman says this and has done it on multiple occasions. You know, he used the Aidan Morris situation to make a point as well about youth programs. And I think he does it because in the past, let's be honest, we have had a federation that has not been particularly proactive in addressing some of these shortcomings. And they don't tend to do it unless they are publicly called out and embarrassed and kind of put into action in that way. At times, this country and Canada soccer have gone through the motions a little bit until that happens, until that kind of public shaming happens. And that has to change. Now, I'm hoping it will start to change, particularly when I look at someone like Jason DeVos, who has played for this program, who knows the country, knows the sport inside out, as well as anyone in Canadian soccer. I'm hoping that we get a federation now that is more proactive. You know, how are we going to build this, not just into 2026, but over 10 years, 20 years? What does this look like? What is our plan here? I'm hoping that starts to change and some of these things start to be addressed. It's very early days, obviously, for the new administration. They're still massively understaffed with all the departures that have happened there, but that needs to start to happen. And so while I don't think it's necessary, it's not the reason they lost last night. And I know it's not what people want to hear. I kind of at the same time understand why Herdman feels like he wants to use those moments when cameras are on him and the microphones are on him and there's a lot of attention to make those points, because this is the stuff that does need to be built and does need to grow if this program is going to get anywhere near where the US has gotten over the past 20 years.
Jordan.
Yeah, two things can be true at once, Ollie. And I think the fact is that looking at the US and how they played yesterday in Canada and how they had them all rowing in the same direction, I think that's something that people wanted John Herdman to be accountable for. That I don't want to use the word outcoached, but that the manager in the US got the better of Canada on the day in the final. To use that time to bring up issues, I see why you're doing that. But I think everyone wants to hear about the present, the here and now, what happened on the day, because there's this big momentous occasion. I don't think people were thinking Canada's going to go and steamroll the US 3-0, that we have this in the bag. But this was that moment, T-Bra's last game, the big championship or big trophy that we haven't had in 23 years. So that was a moment to really talk about what was going on, how these guys were prepared, what was the game plan, what went wrong, maybe what he could have done better as a manager. That's the time to be accountable and maybe raise your hand. So I hear the mixed emotions, but I also see your side. I think it's a great point, Ollie, that all their eyes are on you. Everyone's hyper-focused about this. Let's bring up bigger issues because he's in that. We could always look at John Herdman and be like, oh, you could do that better. He got ridiculed at the World Cup for some of his decisions. But also there's a bigger issue at play as well.
Well, I want to ask you, Jordan, I'll get back into some of the CSA stuff in just a moment, but this all was about not having those extra days of preparation. Like yes. Panama, Mexico, United States had 10-day camps entering this tournament. Canada had 4. So Jordan, those extra 5 or 6 days on the training field, do they make that much of a difference for a team with a coach that's been there the entire time, basically the same squad? Like Mexico's coach had been there for a cup of coffee. The American manager, I mean, he's just stepped in. He's had 2 games in charge now. How much of a difference would have those 5 or 6 days have made in terms of determining Canada's chances here?
I think a huge difference. I do. I think when you're looking at your week and you have 10 days to map out as opposed to 4, there are days where you could dedicate to certain things. I can tell you right now, I wasn't in Canada's camp. I was with you beautiful gentlemen for the past week. That there are details that weren't discussed. Or if they were discussed, they weren't discussed deep. Then go into the nitty-gritty. Set pieces is a huge glaring one from yesterday, where maybe it was talked about, maybe they ran through it quickly, but they only had 4 days. If you had 10 days, maybe that's a whole training session dedicated to how are we going to nullify these situations? Who's going to mark a certain player on set pieces? Are we going to tweak things? Do we have a trick up our sleeves for the US? And so in that regard, I see what John Herdman's saying, because you can't cover everything. The more time that you have, the more time that you have with this group, You can dive into those details different and prepare for a final. So I see where he's coming from in many ways.
Ollie, was it about lack of preparation, or was it about individual battles and play? Maybe some of the decisions that were made or weren't made by John Herdman and his staff.
I know what you're saying, Jordan, and I think that there are certainly details, and like you look at set pieces as one, and maybe question, was that affected by not having as much preparation time? To be honest, I don't think it changes the result last night. Where I think it's more important that those camps start to be more robust is like when you talk about it, when you start adding up the days over 3 years or 4 years, a full World Cup cycle, then it starts to add up and count, right? In terms of really building a team that can do some of the things that we're criticizing them for now. I think KJ talks about their play in possession, certainly needs to improve. The play in the final third needs to improve. Like over a period of time, when you have longer camps, I think you will get better results as a result of having more time on the training pitch, more time to build your identity as a team. Do I think the difference in camps, like you said, Wheels, with a US interim coach and a new Mexican coach, do I think it changed? It massively affected the outcome of the games in the tournament? Not really. No, I think that's too short of a sample size to really conclude that.
The things that it wouldn't have changed is Alistair Johnston's bum ankle, the fact that Davies didn't play for 2 months coming into this, Osorio being out for so long. A longer camp doesn't fix any of those things. And I think that it's fair if we turn the spotlight on some of the decisions that were made in this game. And I think that, it's very difficult for a manager, I don't even advise it, to put up their hand and say, you know what, I got it wrong. But there were things that they got wrong. Not starting Steven Vittoria for that game is a big mistake, especially when it comes to those set pieces. He's your best player in terms of aerial challenges, defending set pieces. Yeah. I don't think the U.S. were doing anything special. They're just lofting the ball to the far post and having Zimmerman or Richards get on the end of it. I don't think there was anything extremely sophisticated around it. And if Vittoria at this age, and he's been great for Canada, outstanding. If he can't go back-to-back games, then why is he playing against Panama? And why isn't he playing against the United States? I still don't quite understand not starting Tajon Buchanan. He's one of the top 3 or 4 players on this Canadian team. I know you want something in reserve, something coming off the bench, but does that mean not starting one of your biggest attacking threats and a player that can defend as well if need be? And the fact that when things weren't going their way, you're down 2-0 at the end of the first half, why changes weren't made right at halftime? They waited another 15 minutes in order to make those changes. Those are the 2 things that stood out first and foremost. And the third thing is one that Christian Jack brought up in his post-game words. Alphonso Davies, where's he playing? How are you going to get the most out of Davies? Because it was a disappointing performance, and that's putting it lightly when it came to Alphonso Davies on Sunday. There was a period for 15 minutes he was switched over to play on the right side to end the first half of play. Davies on the right side, if you want to give a different look for 5 minutes, I understand it. For 15 minutes, that he's playing at the back and he's playing forward. He's freelancing in the middle. He's asked to do, or maybe he's deciding to try to do way too much. They have to figure out this Davies quandary. Those are 3 things that jump off the page for me that could have made a difference in this game if things, as John and Eustachio said post-game, if things were that close, slim margins, well, these are some of the things that maybe can cover over those slim margins and turn things in Canada's favor. I'm not sure if you agree or disagree on that, Ollie.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of it. I didn't really understand the switch of Davies to the right. I don't know that it was because he was having problems on the left-hand side. I didn't really see a ton of that. I know the US had some moments down that side of the pitch, but I don't think it was necessarily Davies who was the weak link there. I think it maybe had more to do with the fact that Richie Laryea was getting nothing out of Anthony Robinson. Like Robinson was just shutting him down every time he went forwards. And so they wanted to try something different there. Again, that maybe comes back to, should we have seen Tajon Buchanan from the start? Quite probably. What I will say on Davies is I think it's an issue. We're not getting consistently what we'd like to see out of Alphonso Davies in a Canada jersey right now. I think that's not really up for question at this point after the World Cup and then this game. I also think it's dangerous to focus too much on that, like to make the whole thing about how do we get the best out of Alphonso Davies as opposed to how do we create the best version of Canada. Obviously, he is going to be a huge part of that no matter what. But I think, like you saw with that American team last night, Christian Pulisic had an okay game. He wasn't, a real difference maker on the night as he has been in the past. But that's okay because they have a team that all over the park is organized, understands their roles, has threats everywhere. And so someone like Gio Reyna can step up and take the workload off his shoulders if that is what the game is giving you. And Canada has enough attacking talent with Buchanan, with Larin, with Davids, with Kone, for that to be the case, to have a varied attack, to have different options. It doesn't need to all be about Davies. So yes, there are some questions there in terms of what his best position is, how you get the best out of him. I think he was better with Adekubi behind him last night, but that might be something that's just specific to that particular game. And I think, starting to bend over backwards too much to make this the Davies team and just solely focus on how do we get the best out of that player, I don't necessarily think that's the path we should go down here, as much as it is something that obviously John Herdman will be thinking about.
Yeah, it's not the path we need to go down. I'll speak quickly about two things. Wheels, I was nodding my head. I felt like I was in church because you're really speaking to me when you're talking about your three. But I'll talk only about two. Maybe it's the time we're spending with each other, brother. Who knows? But Davies switching positions, I'll say this much, and I'll make it about myself for 10 seconds. Me playing defensive midfield and then having to do a shift center back, different brain. You have to grow into a game. It's very difficult. Anytime my boy Lovey Rod, she would go down and then I'd have to go play in the back, I have to be like, well, I can't take risks going forward now. I'm the last man. The way I defend is different. It's just different. It takes you a bit of time to get into the swing of things and get in the rhythm, right? Alphonso Davies, he is unbelievable. Even on an off day, he still provides something, right? But I think we need to find a way for Canada to start playing in a position where he can play all the time and grow into that. We know he can play different spots, but it's not, hey, let's plug him in and see what works. It's put him in a position where he can grow and he can be 80, 90, 100%, and not just throw him up top, be at 50%, or throw him left wing and be at 60% and throw him right wing and see what happens there. Like that concoction, that blend is not getting the best out of him. Now with Tajon Buchanan, I said at the beginning of the game thinking that this is going to be an even, toe-to-toe, lot of duels type of game, right? So I see why maybe John Herdman saves Tajon and you want him to finish off a game. Also thinking as well, guys, it's not a normal 90-minute game. Maybe it could have went to extra time and you need someone that still has the legs to just finish off a game, then you maybe would have to take out a Davies. But we could see early on in the game, we needed someone with energy. We needed someone to take on players. Scally and Robinson were feeling so confident early on in the game. We had an X factor. Canada had an X factor in Tajon Buchanan that waited till the second half, and not even the 45th minute, the second half, 60 whatever minute he came on to try to change the game. At that point, it was too far gone. Right. So, yeah, maybe as a manager, I agree, Wheels, you don't want to go into the media and say other things to that maybe you should have done different. But I think we've seen it even with France and Argentina. You mentioned before, Wheels, in the past World Cup final. It's like 20 minutes in, 30 minutes in. You see it doesn't work. Your game plan, how you thought, it doesn't work. And you have a sub. You have a gem, a golden boy on the bench that can definitely bring some energy into the game on the bench. Put him on. 30 minutes in, put him on. No one is going to criticize you saying, man, we're 2-0 down. I got it wrong, but let's make something out of this and let's go for it and try to come back. Switch it up. So for me, the only criticism with John Herdman is those switches could have came earlier. You have to adjust now as a manager. And that one switch could have made the world of a difference in a game like yesterday.
I mean, he was trying. He was trying to find something that worked. And his team has been so tactically adaptable over the course of, his tenure as manager. It's one of the strengths of the team, in fairness. I think it caught Canada by surprise that they brought in Aronson into the team. Rather than bringing in De La Torre or someone else to play. And then all of a sudden, those fullbacks who regularly get forward all the time for the U.S. and Robinson and Scott, Dester Scott, they played safe. They played back. This was the thing that was mind-numbing to me. All these searching diagonal balls over the top to find either Davies, nothing was coming off because it wasn't there. And Canada, where they were slow to adapt, was trying to take advantage of or exploit the fact that there was two attacking midfield players playing in the middle of the park. And the space wasn't in behind, it was in the front. And they're very slow adapting that way. And the Victoria one for me just needs to happen. These are things, these are learning these are teachable moments for the coaching staff and for the players heading into more big games. That's why big picture, guys, in all of this, I know we're calling this a summit today and some people want to treat it that way. I just think it was a bad night at the office. I just think that they were beaten by a better team on the night, and a team that was more connected in terms of the way they wanted to play against a night for Canada where really decision-making, touches on the ball, 50-50 challenge, whatever it was, they were second best in all of those categories. And it's very difficult to make that up, especially when you're playing on the other team's home field as well. I want to get into the CSA comments a little bit, if you'd oblige me, because there has been so much change within the Canadian Soccer Association that I think John's right in a certain way that things need to change and they need to change quickly. But since he took charge of this team, we've had the Canadian Soccer Association has had 2 different general secretaries, 3 different presidents, the CMO's out, the COO's out. Like, everyone that has been in charge of the organization is gone now. There's positions, important positions that need to be filled. It's an incomplete entity. And this was something that the old regime were adamant on when they took over, that the Canadian Soccer Association had to grow. They needed more talented personnel within it, people that could go and make a true difference. It needed to be more robust because it was threadbare. This is still the story today. He's right in that aspect that things do need to become more robust and more self-serving so they can grow in a professional way ahead of the 2026 World Cup. But after a game like this, there's a time and place, and I'm not sure that this was the time where you're going to get people nodding in agreement. And largely people have. The public has been on the side of the teams and the players. I just don't think that moment was the case. And when it comes to the dollars and cents involved, Canada is just nowhere near on the same level as the United States. This expectation that Canada is going to be like a big dog and is going to be able to spend with the big boys in international football, I think it's a fallacy. I think it's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. The Bournemouths of the world aren't playing on the same playing field as the Manchester Cities of the world. There's just not. There's bigger sides in club football. There's smaller sides. In international football, Canada is a much smaller country. The U.S. Soccer Federation, based upon their new agreement with pay equity, everything that they spent, they made revenues last year, the calendar year, of, I believe it was like $106 million, or it ended up being $122 million. They took a loss of $22 million on that. Their expenditures were $145 million. Canada's not even in the same stratosphere. Canada's dealing with numbers where the revenue is like $47 million on a good year. And they're taking a $6 million loss based upon what was provided to the men's team, which was a lot ahead of the men's World Cup. So look, is there area for growth? Yes. They have a bad kit deal. They're not playing home games. They decided not to play a home game, which would have brought money into the federation. There's self-inflicted wounds here. And there's reasons why, some of the money might not be there where it is. But thinking that Canada is all of a sudden just going to be flush with cash, and this is also a time where the players want the sky, the moon, the stars as well, in terms of what the CBA or a potential CBA looks like in terms of what will compensate them. It's a very difficult one. And I just don't think that this can always be the crutch, the reason going forward why they don't have success. Do things need to improve? Absolutely. But there are certain realities playing soccer in this country that I think all three of us are well aware of, that Canada is never going to be quite there in terms of anywhere close to a level playing field with the likes of the United States or Mexico, a team that's really struggling right now in this region. Oliver, I don't know if you want to pick up on that.
I do, yeah. This is a conversation we need to have, and we might never get to the same level as the United States for obvious reasons. But we do need to figure out how we want to build it here over there, again, not just into 2026, but well beyond that. And we need to figure out quickly if we have the appetite to do it, because it's not perfect in the US. They have their own problems, obviously, as we've seen over the past few months in particular. But they also fielded a team last night that is not random chance. They didn't luck into a golden generation of players. It is 20 or 25 years of work. And you can look at the MLS influence on that team. A number of players in that starting 11 have either played in MLS or played in an MLS academy. You can look at the way they've built out their youth programming over the past 20 years and what that's done. You can look at the way they are recruiting dual nationals and doing a great job there to secure those players who could play for other countries. Like it's taken a long time for the States to get to where they are now, and to be able to field a team last night where, again, even without some key players being available for them, 10 players play in top 5 leagues in Europe, and the other one is probably the best defender in MLS in Zimmerman. Like that's a different level to what we have with Canada right now in terms of squad depth, in terms of quality. And we've got to decide again, is it ever going to be a direct comparison? Maybe not, but we've got to decide if we're interested in trying to build our own version of that, our own league, our own youth programming, all across the board, everything that goes into building a robust national team. And like, quite frankly, still right now, I still see a lot of politics. I see a lot of infighting. I see, to be honest with you, some people who want the rewards without really putting in all the work. And I don't know if we're up for it. We're going to find out in the coming years, particularly as we go into co-hosting a home World Cup. But that team and the difference between the two teams last night is not something that's just like, oh, the US got lucky with a few players and happens to be stronger than Canada.
Yeah. Just to reiterate, there's a CBA on the table that will make the women's national team the second highest paid women's national team in the world. It would put Canada, the men's national team, in the top 10%. If you're going to get paid that kind of, if you're going to get paid to represent your country, this isn't a professional team that you're playing for, then that comes with certain expectations and obligations. It just does. If you're a coach and you're getting bonuses based upon success rates, and that comes out of the kitty as well, that comes with expectation. It's just, we need to be careful about this slippery slope that we've gone down here, where the dollars are being used. Quite clearly, something that will help every program is our own domestic leagues. That's plural, men's and women's, investing in that. More youth camps, more pathways. But unfortunately, when so much is being demanded at the top level, is left for very little at the bottom. This is where something I really think the professional infrastructure that's growing in this country can get invested in. If they can become more invested in the youth pathways into our national programs, I think that there could be inherent benefit. I think it's worth having that conversation going forward. But a lot of the money right now, what the US bring in compared to Canada, like, we are not there yet as a soccer nation. We have 40 million people in this country. It's just over bigger than the size of California. It's a massive market. We're playing at an inherent disadvantage, and we need to find ways to take the elements that are working and collaboratively bring it together with people working together to make the most out of what we have. So just the comments, I think we all understand them, time and place. And is that the reason? I think that we can raise some good questions when it comes to that moving forward.